Somewhere in the South China Sea in 1347, a ship cut through the water under a heavy sky. On board is a man who has already walked more of the earth than almost any human alive, a Moroccan scholar and explorer who has stood before sultans, crossed deserts, survived pirate raids, and navigated the known world from end to end. He has seen empires rise and crumble. He has dined with kings and slept in the wilderness. But nothing in 30 years of travel has prepared him for what he is about to see. He is brought before the throne, and on that throne sits a woman, not a queen consort or not a regent, holding power for an absent husband, a ruler, a warrior, a woman who has personally driven a lance through the body of an enemy king in the middle of open battle, severed his head, and carried it back to her own court. The traveller's name is Ibn Battuta, and in the pages of his monumental travelogue, he will write about this woman with an awe that is almost impossible to miss. He will describe her army, her court, her ambitions, and her iron refusal to ever be controlled by anyone. Her name is Urduja, and most of the world has never heard of her. Stay with me, because what you are about to discover is not just the story of a remarkable woman. It is the story of a warrior civilization hidden at the edge of history. A kingdom so powerful it rivaled the China of the Mongols. A culture that produced female soldiers so feared, so disciplined, so deadly, that entire armies turned and fled at the sight of them. This is the story of Urduja Princess, general, ruler, and one of the most electrifying leaders the medieval world ever produced. If this is the kind of history that deserves to be told, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Now, let us begin. To understand Urduja, you first have to understand the world she was born into. Because if you are imagining the Philippines of the 14th century as some isolated, undiscovered corner of the earth, a collection of quiet islands waiting to be found, you could not be more wrong. Cast your mind back to the year 1300 inches, the age of empires. The Mongol dynasty, the Yuan, controls China, the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, commanding the world's largest army and the most sophisticated trading network in history. To the south, the Srivisayan Empire has spent centuries as the dominant maritime force of Southeast Asia, a civilization built on sea power, trade, and conquest. The great Majapahit kingdom is rising in Java. The sultanates of Sumatra are flourishing. The ancient silk and spice routes are alive with ships from a dozen nations carrying silk, ceramics, pepper, gold, and slaves. And right at the heart of it all, right in the path of every trading vessel moving between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, lies a kingdom. Its name is Tawalisi. The scholars and traders who know it describe Tawalisi as vast. Its borders stretch from the coastal lowlands along the Lingayen Gulf all the way east into the mountain fringes of the Cordillera Range. Its ruler commands a fleet of war junks powerful enough to challenge China itself. Ibn Battuta, who was no stranger to impressive kingdoms, would later write that the sovereign of Tawalisi possesses numerous junks with which he makes war upon the Chinese until they sue for peace and consent to grant him certain concessions. Read that again slowly. A kingdom in the northern Philippines, forcing the greatest empire on earth to sue for peace. This is the world Urduja grows up in. A world of geopolitics, naval warfare, international trade, and fierce regional competition. A world in which power is the only language anyone speaks. And from her earliest years, Urduja is being shaped to speak that language fluently. Her father's name, according to the oral traditions and Battuta's own account, is Tawalisi, a king so central to the identity of his land that the kingdom itself carries his name. He is, by all accounts, a formidable ruler and a strategist, a man who builds alliances the way other men build fences piece by piece, carefully, with an eye on every possible angle of threat. and he raises his daughter the same way. From childhood, Urduja does not learn to weave or to prepare food or to wait for a suitable husband. She learns the kampilan, the long, single-edged sword of the Philippine warrior, a weapon designed to devastate armor in close combat. She learns horsemanship. She learns navigation, the reading of wind and tide, the art of commanding men and women across the chaos of open water. She studies the tactics of war. She learns Arabic and Turkic languages of diplomacy and commerce, because her father understands that knowledge of another man's tongue is a form of power that no sword can match. She is being built, in every possible way, to lead. And she knows it. But here is where the story takes on a dimension that historians still wrestle with today. Because Urduja is not simply being trained as a soldier, she is being placed at the head of something unprecedented. The Kinalakian. Say that word, Kinalakian. In the language of the region, it translates roughly as, those who are like men. But do not mistake that for a diminishment. It is not a comparison, it is a declaration. The Kinalakian are Urduja's personal army, an elite corps of female warriors, skilled horsewomen, javelin throwers, and hand-to-hand fighters who have spent their entire lives perfecting the art of war. Their bodies are described by historical accounts as powerful, muscular, conditioned, built not for appearance but for function. The accounts explain their origin with a brutal clarity that tells you everything about the world these women came from. The male population of the region had been decimated by generations of war. The centuries-long expansion of the Srivisayan Empire had bled the lowland kingdoms dry of fighting-age men. And so the women stepped in, not as a last resort, as soldiers, as riders, as warriors, and they were not merely adequate, they were extraordinary. Ibn Battuta will later describe them with unmistakable respect. Women who fight like men in battle, women who excel at the javelin, women who ride into combat with the same ferocity and the same skill as any soldier he had ever encountered in 30 years of travel across 3 continents. Now, imagine what it means to grow up at the center of that. Urduja does not just command the Kinalakian. She is one of them. She trains alongside them. She fights alongside them. When the time comes for battle, she does not watch from behind a wall. She rides at the front, and she has a code. It is a code that defines her as much as any battle she ever fought. A code that sets her apart from every ruler of her era, male or female, east or west. She announces it publicly, to every suitor who arrives at her court, to every ambassador who tries to negotiate her hand in marriage as part of some political arrangement, to every man who sees her throne and immediately begins calculating how to possess it. She says it simply, and she says it without apology. I will marry only the man who can defeat me. My husband must be braver, stronger, and wiser than myself. No one ever meets the condition. No one ever will. Think about what that declaration costs. Think about what it requires to make it and to hold to it. This is not the 21st century. This is a world where a woman's value is almost entirely defined by her relationship to a man as daughter, as wife, as mother. In every direction you look, China, India, the Islamic world, the kingdoms of Southeast Asia, political marriages are the machinery through which alliances are made and empires are sustained. For a ruler to refuse that machinery entirely is not just unconventional, it is defiant. It is a statement of sovereign identity. It is Urduja saying, clearly and loudly, that she belongs to no one. And the people around her, her warriors, her court, her father, do not try to change her mind. They respect it. Because Urduja has already proven, in blood, that she is exactly what she claims to be. The details of her campaigns have not survived with the precision of a military record. History is rarely that kind to women who lived before the age of detailed documentation. But what has survived, through Battuta's account, through Ibaloy oral tradition, through the fragments of local memory that persist across 7 centuries, paints a picture that is impossible to ignore. There is a battle. We do not know the year, we do not know the name of the enemy kingdom, but we know what happens. The Kinalakian are outnumbered. The enemy presses hard. The line begins to break. Warriors fall around her. The battle turns against them, and in that moment when lesser commanders find excuses to retreat, when survival instinct overrides everything else, Urduja does not pull back. She charges forward, toward the enemy's king. She reaches him. She fights him in the chaos of open battle. She drives her lance through his body. He falls dead in front of his own army, and when he falls, his army does not regroup. It does not reorganize. It breaks, and it runs. Urduja returns to her court carrying his head at the point of her spear. His family later comes to ransom the head back. They pay her a large sum of money for the right to bury their king with dignity. She accepts, and the kingdom of Tawalisi remains unbroken. Now, let us talk about the day the world found out about her. The year is 1347. Ibn Battuta is on the final leg of a journey that will eventually carry him to China. He has been traveling for over 20 years. He is one of the most educated men of his era, a trained Islamic legal scholar, a judge, a diplomat. He has covered a distance that modern historians estimate at over 75,000 miles. He has met more heads of state, more sultans, more kings than almost any individual in history up to that point. He does not impress easily. His ship, a Chinese junk, makes landfall at the port of Kelukari, a prosperous harbour city on the coast of Tawalisi. Standard procedure, his captain goes ashore to pay respects and bring gifts to the local ruler, but the captain comes back with unexpected news. The ruler's son, who had previously governed this city, has been reassigned. His father has given the governorship to someone else, to his daughter, to Urduja. She hears that there is a foreign scholar aboard the ship. She sends for him. And Ibn Battuta, man of the world, traveller extraordinary, man who has sat before emperors, prepares to meet a warrior princess. What he finds shocks him. She is seated on a throne. Around her stand councillors, women of advanced age, experienced and dignified, seated on chairs of sandalwood. The court is decorated with silk canopies and gold plating. It is not the court of a provincial governor, it is the court of a sovereign. And when Ibn Battuta fails to come to her first banquet because he has told his captain he cannot eat with infidels, that their food is forbidden to him under Islamic law, she does not let it pass. She summons him directly, and when he stands before her, she addresses him in Turkish. Then she has ink and paper brought in, and in his presence, with her own hand, she writes in Arabic, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful and the compassionate. She is Muslim. She has been Muslim, and she has been watching him make assumptions about her. What follows is one of the most extraordinary scenes in all of medieval travel literature. She looks at him, and she speaks, and her words have survived for 7 centuries. You, priest, she says, I have had you brought here by my guards because, of all your ship's company, you alone scorned my invitation. You told your captain that we, the people of northern Luzon, are infidels, and that it would be against the prophet's law for you, a holy man, to eat our food. She gestures around the hall. You behold about me, seated around my throne, the elderly ladies who are my counselors. Do their chairs of sandalwood, my silk-canopied and gold-plated throne, suggest the court of a barbarous people? He has no answer. She continues. She tells him that her father, King Dalisay, once welcomed a priest from distant Europe, a man who did not share their faith, did not share their language, and yet sat at their table with curiosity and gratitude. She tells him about the sago palms, the berry palms, the coconut wine, and the gifts she has already sent to his ship. She is not merely defending herself, she is schooling him. And then she pivots. She asks him to tell her about India, the pepper country, as she calls it, pepper being, in that era, as valuable as gold itself. She wants to know the size of its armies, the extent of its wealth, its geography and politics. And when Battuta answers her questions, she leans forward, and she says something that stops the room. I must positively make an expedition to it, and take possession of it for myself. The number of its riches and its troops attract me. She is telling one of the greatest explorers in history that she plans to conquer India. And the most remarkable thing is that you believe her. Because this is not the boast of a woman performing strength for an audience. This is the calculation of a military commander who has already done the impossible once and sees no reason why she cannot do it again. She is not performing, she is strategizing, out loud, in front of a witness. When the meeting ends, she does not send Battuta back to his ship empty-handed. She gives him robes, 2 elephant loads of rice, 2 buffaloes, 10 sheep, 4 pounds of syrup, and 4 large jars, martabans. They were filled with ginger, pepper, lemons, and mangoes, all salted for the sea voyage. It is an act of extraordinary generosity from a woman he insulted before he even met her. Ibn Battuta will record all of this in his Rihla, his travel account, which he dictates near the end of his life and which will become one of the most important documents of the medieval world. And when he writes about Urduja, there is no condescension in the text. There is no attempt to minimize her or explain her away. He writes about her the way he writes about the most powerful rulers he has encountered, with respect, with something close to wonder. Now, let us sit with something for a moment, because this is where the story gets complicated, and honestly, it gets more fascinating because of the complication. Was Urduja real? It is the question that has divided Filipino historians for over a century, and it is a question that deserves a serious answer, not a dismissive one. Here is what we know with certainty. Ibn Battuta was real. His travelogue, the Rihla, is one of the most well-documented accounts of medieval travel in existence. Large portions of it have been verified against archaeological and historical records from China, India, East Africa, and the Middle East. He was not a fabulist. He was a trained scholar who wrote with the precision of a man who understood that his credibility was his legacy. And in that document, in the original Arabic, Urduja exists. Now, the location of Tawalisi is disputed. Scholars have proposed Pangasinan, Luzon broadly, Java, Cambodia, and several other locations. The debate has never been fully resolved. Battuta mentions elephants in Urduja's kingdom, which some historians point out are not native to the Philippines, though others note that elephants were actively traded as tribute animals across Southeast Asia in that era, and that Battuta may have encountered them as gifts rather than indigenous wildlife. But here is what tips the scales. José Rizal, the Philippines' own national hero, a polymath, a physician, a linguist, and one of the sharpest analytical minds of the 19th century, reviewed Battuta's account and performed his own calculations. He estimated the distance and sailing time between the port Battuta described and the coast of China. His conclusion was unambiguous. While I may have doubts regarding the accuracy of Ibn Battuta's details, Rizal wrote, I still believe in the voyage to Tawalisi. Rizal believed in Urduja. In 1916, American historian Austin Craig at the University of the Philippines built on Rizal's calculations and traced the kingdom of Tawalisi specifically to Pangasinan. His analysis was not contested for decades and found its way into Philippine school textbooks. Then there is Ibaloy. The Ibaloy are one of the major indigenous ethno-linguistic groups of the Cordillera mountain range, the ancient highlands that tower above the Pangasinan lowlands. Their oral history is meticulous. They do not name their children after their ancestors casually. According to their tradition, a child receives the name of an ancestor only when a direct blood relationship can be traced, and typically it skips generations deliberately, so that the name of a great-great-grandparent lives in the body of a living descendant. In the Ibaloi oral tradition, there is a woman. Her name is Deboksa. Dr. Moore Tadeo Pungayan, a respected Ibaloi scholar and professor at St. Louis University in Baguio City, is direct about this. Linguistically, he says, Urduja is Deboksa in Ibaloi. We've always had a woman named Deboksa from time immemorial among the generations of Ibaloi. The name describes a woman of strong quality and character who is nobly descended. That is an Ibaloi name. That is why the Ibaloi trace their ancestry from Urduja. A book on the history of Benguet province, written by scholars Anavik Bagamasbad and Zenaida Hamada Pawid, documents the Benguet genealogy from 1380 to 1899. And in that genealogy, in the memory of the Tublé informants, there is this passage: the extent of inter-settlement alliances is climaxed in the memory of Tublé informants with the reign of Deboksa, Princess Urduja, in Pinga. She is acknowledged as the granddaughter of Udayan, an outstanding warrior of Daru. Her death signaled the continuous decline of kinship and alliance between highland and lowland settlements. 700 years later, in oral tradition carefully preserved through generations, the name is still there. Here is the question that haunts this story, the question that academics debate at conferences in Pangasinan, while the people of the province have long since made up their minds. If Urduja was only a myth, if she was invented, embellished, or misremembered, why does her name survive in the mountain genealogies of a people who never had reason to invent her? Why does the Ibaloi oral tradition, preserved across centuries with meticulous care, point to the same woman, in the same region, in the same time period? History has a way of surviving in the bodies of the people who lived through it. And the body of Urduja's memory has never stopped breathing. In 1953, the governor of Pangasinan named the official governor's residence in Lingayen after her. The palace stands today. Its name is Urduja House. In 2019, the International Astronomical Union named a minor planet in her honor. Minor planet 5749 Urduja. A piece of rock and ice orbiting the sun, carrying the name of a 14th-century warrior princess from the northern Philippines. A statue of her stands at the 100 Islands National Park, one of the Philippines' most visited natural landmarks. She is depicted in her armor, holding her weapon, looking out across the sea. In 2008, an animated film told her story to a new generation of Filipino children. In 2022, a primetime television drama brought her back to Philippine screens. The Philippines has declared her a national heroine. But here is what I want you to understand, and this is the part that matters most. The significance of Urduja is not simply that she was powerful. Power, in the medieval world, was common among the nobility. Kings and princes and sultans had power. What makes Urduja extraordinary is what she did with it, how she defined it, how she refused to allow it to be taken from her, transferred to a husband, diluted by marriage, or diminished by the expectations of a world that had no category for what she was. She invented her own category. She built an army of women in a world that had decided women were not soldiers. She governed a kingdom in a world that had decided women were not rulers. She negotiated with the greatest explorer of the medieval age as an equal as his superior, in fact, because she was the one on the throne in a world that had decided women were not political actors. And she was not quietly exceptional. She was loudly, deliberately, almost confrontationally exceptional. Her refusal to marry was not a private choice, it was a public declaration. Her challenge to potential suitors was not a romantic conceit, it was a policy, a governing philosophy, a statement that the power of Tawalisi would not be traded away through a marriage contract. Think about every powerful person you have ever admired. Think about what made them compelling. It was not just their capabilities, it was the clarity of their conviction. The refusal to be something they were not. The willingness to pay the cost of being exactly what they chose to be. Urduja paid that cost in every dimension of her life. She paid it as a child, training with a weapon instead of a doll. She paid it as a young woman, leading soldiers into battles that could have killed her. She paid it as a ruler, turning away suitor after suitor, each one a potential alliance, each one a political asset she deliberately refused. She paid it when she rode toward an enemy king in the middle of a losing battle, when the rational calculus said retreat and her entire nature said forward. She paid for it, and the kingdom of Tawalisi remained hers. There is something deeply instructive in that. Something that speaks not just to warriors and not just to women, but to anyone who has ever been told that the kind of power they are reaching for is not meant for someone like them. Urduja was not supposed to exist, and she existed anyway. She was not supposed to lead, and she led anyway. She was not supposed to be remembered. 700 years later, her name is in the stars. That is what legacy looks like, not monuments built by the people who remember you fondly, but the stubborn, irrepressible refusal of your story to disappear even when scholars say it should, even when empires try to overwrite it, even when centuries of silence press down on the archive. Urduja survives because she was real enough in deed, in character, in the memory of the people who came after her, that no amount of historical skepticism has been able to erase her. And here is the part of her story I find most haunting. Ibn Battuta sails away from Tawalisi after 17 days at sea. He reaches China. He continues his journey. He eventually dictates his travelogue, and in it he leaves us this woman, this warrior, this ruler, this voice speaking in Turkish and Arabic from a gold-canopied throne at the edge of the known world, and then he moves on. We do not know what happened to Urduja after 1347. We do not know if she ever launched her expedition to India. We do not know how she died, or when, or what ceremony attended her passing. The Ibaloi genealogy suggests her death marked the beginning of a long decline in the alliances between the highland and lowland peoples of Luzon, which tells us that her governance was not merely symbolic, that it was a real political force holding a complex coalition together. When she was gone, that coalition fell apart. What does that tell us? It tells us that she was the center of gravity for an entire geopolitical order. It tells us that she was not just the most powerful person in her kingdom, she was the reason the kingdom cohered. The relationships between peoples, the trade agreements between coastal ports and mountain settlements, the peace that stretched from Zambales to Mountain Province, all of it was held in place by her presence, her reputation, her authority. When she was gone, it all came undone. How many leaders in history can you say that about? How many individuals have ever been so irreplaceable that their absence reshapes the landscape around them? Most people in power spend their entire careers trying to build institutions that outlast them, trying to make themselves unnecessary, trying to create something larger than their own lifespan. Urduja was the institution. She was the alliance. She was the covenant between the mountains and the sea. And when she died, the mountain peoples and the coastal peoples slowly drifted apart, and the memory of that unified world faded into the mists of oral tradition, preserved only in the careful genealogies of the Ibaloi people who remembered, generation after generation, that they were once part of something bigger, something that a warrior princess from the shores of the Lingayen Gulf had held together with her bare hands. Before I leave you with her legacy, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. You are watching this because you care about history, not the curated textbook version, the real thing, the complicated, unresolved, sometimes infuriating thing, the history that includes people who were left out, overlooked, or deliberately forgotten. Urduja was all of those things. She was not a European queen, so the major histories of the medieval world did not center her. She was not part of the famous dynasty-building narratives of East Asia, so the Chinese chronicles did not foreground her. She ruled a kingdom that the colonial powers of the 16th century had no interest in preserving, and when the Spanish arrived in the Philippines, the indigenous records, the court documents, the political histories of the pre-colonial kingdoms were largely destroyed or ignored. Urduja survived the destruction of her world's archives because one man wrote her down, and because the people of the mountains never forgot her name. That is a razor-thin margin of survival. That is how close we came to never knowing she existed at all. And that should make you angry, and curious, and hungry for more. Because if Urduja survived on the thinnest possible thread of documentation, if her story is this compelling, this complete, this extraordinary, and she is still barely known outside the Philippines, how many others are there? How many warrior queens, how many philosopher rulers, how many women who broke every category their world tried to put them in, how many of them exist in archives we have not yet opened? In oral traditions we have not yet recorded, in languages we have not yet translated. History is not a fixed thing. It is not a completed project. It is a living, breathing excavation. And every time we find someone like Urduja, we are not adding a footnote. We are reshaping the whole picture. We are saying, the world was never as simple as we were told. Women led armies. Women governed kingdoms. Women told the greatest explorers of their age to sit down and listen. Urduja told Ibn Battuta to sit down and listen. And he did. And 7 centuries later, we are still listening. Her name means, in Sanskrit, something like rising sun, Udaya, the sun that rises, the breath that does not stop, Urduja. There is a palace in Pangasinan that carries her name. There is a minor planet in the solar system that carries her name. There is a statue facing the sea that carries her likeness. There are children in the highlands of Luzon who carry the name Deboxa, without always knowing why, without always knowing that they are carrying the echo of a woman who once held a kingdom together by the sheer force of what she was. And now you carry it too. You know her name. You know her story. You know what she did in 1347, standing before a foreign scholar who had dismissed her people as barbarians, and speaking with a precision and a dignity and a controlled fury that made him understand, in the space of one conversation, that he had made a catastrophic error of judgment. You know what she did on a battlefield when the line broke and the rational choice was retreat. You know what she said to every man who came to her court hoping to marry into her throne. You know that she refused to be anything other than exactly what she was. That is Urduja, and she deserves to be known. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it made you want to know more, then let this video find someone else who needs to hear it. Share it. Leave a comment below telling me which moment struck you most. Was it the battlefield charge? The confrontation with Ibn Battuta? The 7 centuries of memory preserved in the mountains of the Cordillera? Tell me. I read every single one. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because this channel is dedicated to exactly this, the history that did not make the textbooks. The rulers, the warriors, the visionaries who shaped the world and were then quietly moved to the margins of the story. There are more of them, so many more, and we are going to find them. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I will see you in the next one. Because somewhere in the archive, another name is waiting to rise.